Most weeks of my life used to fit in a tool bag. Monday through Friday, I drove out of Minocqua before sunrise with a thermos of gas station coffee, a Milwaukee pack-out full of hand tools, and whatever prints I downloaded the night before. Lake, homes in Hazelhurst with smart thermostats that never got configured right. Bait shops where every freezer, bubbler, and neon beer sign was on one tired 100-amp panel from 1978. Family lodges with cloth wiring in one wing and Romex in the other, all of it one hard freeze away from a service call nobody wanted in January. I'm Travis West, 34, licensed master electrician, and before all this, I was the exact kind of guy who trusted a meter reading over his own nerves. If something buzzed, sparked, or shut down, it had a reason. Loose neutral, bad breaker, water where water shouldn't be. You traced the line, found the fault, fixed the fault. End of story. That's why inheriting my Uncle Dale's hunting cabin made sense to me as a project and not a feeling. Dale died in late October, one of those quiet heart attacks men his age pretend won't happen to them. He left me 40 acres of mixed pine and birch, a weathered one-story cabin with a crawl space, and a gravel drive that turned into ruts every spring thaw. It sat 20 minutes down logging roads west of town, far enough out that your phone went from one bar to no service somewhere around the old quarry. It was beautiful in the way old things are beautiful when you don't have to maintain them. I had to maintain it. My own mortgage wasn't going anywhere, and a second property tax bill was laughable in the kind of way that makes you stare at your kitchen table for 10 full minutes. So I did what I knew. I spent every spare evening and weekend at the cabin, rewiring outlets, replacing a half-dead baseboard run, adding heat tape on vulnerable lines, swapping porch floods for motion lights, and building a cleaner little electrical map than the place had ever seen. I fixed the front steps, resealed windows, and listed it as a rustic Airbnb with enough honesty to protect myself and enough charm to get bookings. Off-grid quiet. Northwoods cabin, good for hunters, couples, and people who need to disappear for 2 days. That line got attention. By December, my routine was clockwork. Work crews by day, guest messaging at lunch, turnovers on Fridays, strip beds, wipe surfaces, reset lock code, test smoke alarms, run taps, check panel, leave 2 bundles of firewood, and a laminated "How to Use the Wood Stove Without Burning This Place Down" card I'd made on my own printer. Some weeks I stayed over after turnover because something always broke when the temperature dropped below 10. Frozen P-trap, GFCI tripping, because somebody set wet boots on the bathroom heater. One bachelor party managed to plug in 3 space heaters and a fondue pot in one room and then wrote in my review, "Charming, needs electrical upgrade." People are incredible. I kept things practical. I didn't date much. My long-term girlfriend Erin lived in Rhinelander and had been patient with my one more project weekend for months. My younger brother Luke helped with plowing when he could, though his help usually came with commentary. "You're running a motel for people who think Wi-Fi is oppression," he told me one Sunday while we wrestled a dead mini fridge into my trailer. "They pay cleaning fees to cosplay hardship," I said. "I'm not judging." "You should judge. It's healthy." He was smiling, and I was too. It was simple then. The cabin itself sat in a shallow clearing with pines crowding close enough that wind sounded like surf most nights. There was a neighboring property, maybe a quarter-mile downslope, an old year-round place owned by a retired couple named Ken and Mary Boudreau. They had two blue heelers that patrolled their yard like tiny prison guards and barked at anything with fur. The rest of the time, it was quiet in the way only Northwood's winter can be quiet. No road noise, no planes, just tree creak, stove tick, and snow settling off branches in soft thumps. Quiet was the product I sold. The first sound happened on a Tuesday night in late January when I was alone up there replacing a bathroom exhaust fan. Around 2:17 a.m., the cabin floor gave a faint 3-beat vibration under my cot in the living room. Thumb, 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 like someone bumping joists from below. I woke up, listened, and heard what I took for a coyote call outside, stretched and low. I checked the time because I always check the time when something wakes me. 2:17. I went back to sleep. Next night, same thing. 2:17, 3 pulses, then that call again. Not loud, not close enough to spike adrenaline. Just wrong in a way I couldn't pin down, like sound coming through a vent instead of open air. By the 4th night, I was annoyed. I'd been working 10-hour days in Lac du Flambeau, rewiring a boathouse, and needed sleep. I did a full perimeter walk with my headlamp and thermal handheld. Saw rabbit tracks, older deer tracks, no fresh predator sign near the porch. Crawl space vents looked intact. No obvious denning under the skirting. I even banged on the access hatch with a shovel handle and listened for movement. Nothing. I told myself the same thing I'd tell a client. Old structures transmit noise weird. Temperature swings flex wood. Frozen ground can shift supports. Coyotes sing at night. Go to bed. Then wildlife started doing things I'd never seen on that parcel. Deer used to cut through the clearing at dawn, easy and predictable, especially after I put out all the salt blocks for guests who wanted wildlife viewing photos from the kitchen window. One week, they stopped crossing entirely. Tracks ended at tree line and turned off. Ravens began showing up at dusk, 6 or 7 at a time, lining the roof peak and chimney cap in total silence. Not cawing. Just sitting there facing one direction, the mudroom side, where the crawl space vent was. I only noticed because silence is louder when you expect noise. At Ken and Mary's place, the healers quit ranging up toward my lot. First time I saw it, Ken was walking them near the shared trail, and both dogs hit a spot 20 yards from my porch, froze, hackles up, and started that deep warning growl that doesn't match their size. They stared straight at the underside vent and backed up without taking their eyes off it. Ken looked at me and shrugged like he was embarrassed on their behalf. Probably porcupine under there. Maybe, I said. One of the dogs peed and dragged Mary back down the trail. I started troubleshooting the way I always troubleshoot. Systems first. I checked the furnace ducts for loose hangers or harmonics. Tested for pressure changes when bathroom fan and range hood ran together. Pulled panel cover and checked for arcing neutral heat. Anything that could create vibration through framing. Nothing out of range. Then structure. I crawled under with a respirator and light. Found dry dirt. Old paw prints, too degraded to date. No droppings fresh enough to matter. No signs of recent digging at the perimeter. I reinforced 2 vents anyway, and stapled hardware cloth where it looked vulnerable. Set 3 trail cams at different angles, all with fresh batteries and large cards. One at porch corner, one on a birch, facing the crawl space side, one near the trail approach. The first night, all 3 cams recorded static for 32 minutes between 2:10 and 2:42. Not snow, not lens fog. Static like TV noise blown white, then a full-frame flare, then normal footage of empty yard. I swapped cameras with my own hunting cams from home. Same result 2 nights later. When I called Airbnb support to ask how to phrase a temporary listing pause for unresolved wildlife noise under structure, the woman on the line sounded sympathetic in that script way and told me, natural property noises are common in remote listings, and guests usually appreciate an authentic environment experience. I laughed once without humor and said, "Sure." Luke said I was overtired and maybe still carrying Dale's death heavier than I thought. He wasn't cruel about it. He just knew me too well. "You're sleeping out there alone, doing double shifts, then listening for ghosts," he told me over burgers at his place. "Take 2 weekends off. Let it sit." "I can't let it sit," I said. "Bookings are stacked through February." "Then stop checking the clock at night." That would have been good advice if the floor hadn't kept waking me. 3 pulses, always 3, always 2:17. By early February, I had a method. I'd set my phone alarm for 2:12, wake up before it happened, stand in the hallway in socks, and hold still. At 2:17, the pine boards beneath me shivered in that same 3-count vibration, subtle but unmistakable. Then came the howl, except howl stopped being the right word. It sounded strangled, chest deep, and close enough that I could feel it in my sternum, as if a throat was pressed to subfloor and voiced through lumber. Once you hear something through your feet, denial gets expensive. Still, I kept taking reservations. A retired couple from Appleton left a 5-star review and wrote, "So peaceful except a strange low animal call at night, LOL." A pair of ice fishermen checked out a day early and told me they just preferred motel beds. Neither would elaborate. I told myself if there were a real danger, somebody would say it directly. Mid-month, I borrowed a thermal scope from a client who ran hounds for bear season and drove out on a moonless Thursday to settle it. I parked dark, no porch lights, and watched from the tree line for 2 hours in sub-zero air. Rabbits glowed white pinballs near brush. A fox crossed at distance. Cabins stood black and still. At 2:17, I heard the 3 floor thumps from outside, audible through walls, and then the call rose from underneath like breath forced through wet cloth. My scope showed nothing under the structure but a flat wash of cold. No hot body, no den, no movement. At 2:18, every raven on the roof lifted off at once and vanished into the trees without making a sound. I didn't sleep there that night. The next week got worse in small, insulting ways. Motion lights tripped with nothing on camera. A faint animal musk smell appeared in the mudroom, rank and metallic, then disappeared by morning. A hallway runner I always kept centered was shifted 6 inches left after a guest-free night, as if something heavy had rolled beneath that section and telegraphed up through flooring. I measured the sag between joists and found new bowing where there hadn't been any in November. I called the county non-emergency line after hearing a louder series of impacts just before dawn on a cleaning day. 2 deputies came out in an SUV, looked under the cabin with 1 flashlight, and spent more time talking about snowmobile trails than my report. "You got raccoons or coyotes?" one said. "Trap 'em." "Coyotes don't get under there," I said. He gave me the look people give when they decide you're 1 sentence from saying aliens. "Then get a wildlife guy. We don't have much to work with." I didn't mention the exact sound anymore. I didn't mention 2:17. I nodded, thanked them, watched their tail lights disappear. That Friday, I had a couple checking in from Madison for a digital detox anniversary weekend. I considered canceling. I opened the app, hovered over the button, and pictured 2 mortgage payments and a truck note and the credit card, with material costs from Dale's place still climbing. I left the booking alone. After they arrived, I did my usual walkthrough with forced cheer. Showed them thermostat quirks, wood stove damper emergency contact list taped inside pantry. They were nice, in that city way, where people are excited by ordinary things. "This is perfect," the husband said, spinning once in the living room. "Listen to that quiet." I looked at the floor and said, "Yeah." I drove home, slept badly, and came back the next night because a storm had knocked power twice in the area, and the app showed an offline thermostat alert. By the time I got there, sleet had crusted the steps, and wind pushed powder across the porch like smoke. The guests had gone into town for dinner, according to their message, so I let myself in with the owner code and headed straight to the utility closet. Main breaker was fine. One branch had tripped, likely from a space heater plus microwave. I reset it, checked load, and was reaching to close the panel when the house settled under me in a long groan. Then 3 distinct thumps hit from below, hard enough this time to rattle the mudroom bench. 217 glowed on my phone screen. The howl came immediately after. No distance, no echo, just a compressed, wet bellow right under the threshold that made the metal panel door vibrate against my hand. I stood still and listened as it moved beneath me, not scurrying, not scrambling, but with deliberate weight that traveled from mudroom toward the hall in a line almost parallel to my feet. One board ahead of me flexed upward a fraction, then dropped. I clicked on my headlamp, crouched, and aimed at a warped seam where 2 planks had separated near the door trim. There was maybe half an inch of gap, black as a cut. For a second I saw only dust and darkness, then 2 reflective points appeared from below. Eye shine, but wrong. Too high under a floor with barely 30 inches of clearance, set wider than a coyote's. They didn't bob or flinch in my light. They held steady, level with my knees, and then both blinked sideways at once, a pale membrane sliding in from the edges like a shutter. I jerked the beam left without thinking. The eyes slid back in perfect sync and vanished. Something long scraped wood underneath, slow and careful, like it knew exactly where I was standing. I don't remember deciding to move. 1 second I was crouched with my headlamp aimed into that seam, and the next I was standing in the kitchen with my back against the counter, breathing through my mouth like I'd just come up from deep water. The cabin was quiet again. Wind at the eaves, refrigerator hum, no more scraping. I told myself 3 things in order. 1. Eye shine can distort in reflective surfaces. 2. Height perception is garbage when you're crouched and spooked. 3. If there was an actual person under the floor, I had 2 guests coming back from town and a liability nightmare on top of a felony. That 3rd thought got me moving better than courage did. I grabbed the mudroom mag light, a pry bar, and the old fiberglass fish tape I kept by the panel for pulling wire in tight runs. Then I stepped out onto the porch and came around to the crawl space access hatch. Sleet needled my face sideways. The motion light kicked on and painted the snow crust white. I could hear my own boots grinding salt and ice. The hatch was where it always was. 2 rusted barrel bolts and a warped frame Dale had built out of scrap plywood 10, maybe 15 years ago. Both bolts were latched, no fresh marks around them. I stood there listening, light aimed into the seam around the panel, waiting for any kind of movement underneath. Nothing. I popped one bolt, then the second, and pulled the hatch open hard enough to crack it against the siding. Rank air rolled out. Wet dirt, old wood, and that metallic musk I'd been catching in the mudroom. My light cut a narrow tunnel through dust. Concrete block piers, insulation drooping between joists, no obvious animal, no eyes. "Hey," I yelled into the crawl space, voice louder than I intended. "Anybody under there, come out now." Only the wind answered. I dropped to my knees in sleet and shoved the fish tape in low, running it under the joists in a slow arc, scraping dirt, tapping piers, listening for contact that sounded like hide or bone instead of soil. It snagged on something once near the hallway run, then came back free with clotted mud and a smell like a slaughter barrel left out too long. My chest started that tight, bright thumping that happens when adrenaline doesn't have a job anymore. I shut the hatch, re-bolted it, and stood up just as headlights swept through the trees. The Madison couple turned into the drive, laughing about something, windshield wipers slapping. I wiped my hands on my jeans and met them at the steps before they could ask why their host was kneeling in freezing rain with a pry bar. "Sorry," I said too fast. "Power blip tripped a branch circuit. Should be all good now." The wife looked from my face to the tools and back. "Everything okay?" "Yeah. Just preventative stuff. Welcome back." They went inside with a takeout bag and a bottle of wine like normal people on a normal trip, and I stood on the porch pretending to check the floodlight angle until they stopped glancing at me through the window. I waited in my truck with the engine off for 20 minutes, watched the cabin lights, and left only when I saw them settle in on the couch. I slept maybe 90 minutes at home before my alarm hit. By 7, I was on a service call swapping a sub-panel in Arbor Vitae, and I spent the whole morning torquing lugs one size too hard, because my hands still remembered that sideways blink. At lunch, I called everyone I could think of who might give me a sane answer. First was a guy named Rick Lenz who did nuisance wildlife control out of Tomahawk. "Underfloor noise, Musk, maybe a denning animal," I said, keeping it clinical. "You ever seen coyotes hold up in a crawl space?" "Coyotes don't like tight overhead," he said. "Raccoon, sure. Fisher, maybe. Porcupine, if they're weird." "What about eyeshine high off ground and low clearance?" Pause. "How high?" "Knee height. Under a floor 30 inches off dirt." He gave a short laugh. "Then your floor ain't 30 inches, Travis. Could be a person." "People don't den," he said. "Call sheriff if you think it's people. I can set a live trap Thursday." Thursday was 4 days away. I called the county DNR contact and got routed to voicemail. Left a message that sounded stupid even as I recorded it. Possible unknown mammal behavior, altered deer movement, repeated nocturnal vocalization. No callback that day. I texted Ken Boudreau because he was the closest set of eyes besides mine. "You see anything weird near my place at night?" He replied 10 minutes later. "Only weird thing is your ravens. Dogs won't go up there now." "Why?" I called him. He answered on speaker. Mary in the background asking whether he'd fed the healers. "Ken, be straight with me. You ever hear an animal call from under a structure that sounds almost human?" "Human like talking?" he said. "Human like a throat trying to copy something." Long pause. "I heard foxes scream," he said finally. "Heard coy dogs. Heard a bobcat sound like a woman getting murdered. Nature does ugly noises, that all. He softened his voice then. You running yourself thin, Trav. Dale's place is too much for one guy. I thanked him and hung up, with that useless mix of gratitude and anger you feel when people are trying to help, but still calling you wrong. That afternoon, between jobs, I stopped at Fleet Farm and bought 2 contact mics meant for improvised vibration monitoring, 50 feet of low-voltage cable, and a cheap handheld audio recorder with line-in. If sound was traveling through framing, I'd record through framing. Facts, waveforms, timestamps. I also bought 2 more trail cams, even though I knew what I was going to get. By dusk, I was back at the cabin while the Madison couple still had one night left. I worked outside and under the porch so I wouldn't freak them out. Mounted 1 contact mic to the mudroom joist bay with self-tappers and butyl tape. Another under the hallway span where I'd measured new bowing. Ran cable through a drilled pilot up into the utility closet and fed both channels into the recorder, synced to atomic time on my phone. If 217 was a thing, I wanted it documented. When the guests asked if everything was okay with wildlife, I gave them the same line I'd used before. Remote cabin, winter critters, I'm monitoring. They smiled the tight smile guests use when they decide not to leave a review about whatever they just heard. After checkout Sunday, I started tearing into the problem like it was a troubleshooting exam I refused to fail. I laid flower lines just inside the crawl hatch and around the interior mudroom threshold seam. I zip-tied little brass sleigh bells on 3 support wires under the floor where anything larger than a cat would have to brush through. I drove exterior stakes and ran mason line at measured heights to detect digging or body passage beneath the skirting. I even set a cheap baby monitor speaker in the mudroom and left the receiver in my truck overnight because white noise sometimes reveals pattern when your brain is too scared to admit one exists. At 217, I got the 3 thumps through the receiver so clean it sounded like a fist on hollow plywood. Then the low call, longer this time, ending in a wet click-click that made my skin crawl. In the morning, flour around the hatch was untouched. Bells were still. Mason lines were intact. But the flower line inside the mudroom seam was disturbed from below. Not paw prints, not boot prints. Just a thin crescent where flour had puffed upward through the crack and settled in a fan on the finish side, like someone beneath had exhaled hard through the boards. I took photos with a ruler beside each mark. I sent one to Luke with no caption. He called immediately. What am I looking at? Pressure displacement, I said, from under. Under your floor. Yes. He was quiet a second. Okay. Call someone real. Don't do this alone. I have called people, then call more people. He came out that evening anyway because, underneath the sarcasm, he was still my brother. We did a full sweep together with 2 lights and his shotgun he was absolutely not supposed to have loaded on somebody else's rental property. He joked at first. If a squatter pops out, I'm charging him rent. When we reached the mudroom seam and I showed him exactly where I'd seen the eyes, the joke tone dropped out of him. Could have been reflection, he said, but he said it to the wall, not me. We killed all interior lights and let the room go black, except my headlamp. I crouched where I'd crouched before and aimed into the same split. For 20 seconds, nothing. Then 2 points appeared again. Silver white this time, no red tint like deer, no green like most canids. Set too far apart, too high. Still. Luke sucked air through his teeth. Jesus. See it? Yeah. He racked the shotgun out of instinct, and the sound snapped the moment. The eye slid backward out of the beam in one smooth motion, no jitter, no scramble. Just gone. Luke aimed at the floorboards like he was waiting for them to erupt. Could be a bear with mange, head up weird, he said, voice thin, in 30 inches of clearance. Could be. I don't know. Optical crap. Don't point your light there again. That was the most honest thing anyone had said to me in 2 weeks. I don't know. We stayed another hour and saw nothing else. He slept in his truck, engine running, because he said he didn't trust being inside. At dawn, he drove off without his usual commentary. By Tuesday, he was back to half denial over text. Maybe old mirror shard under there, could be feral dog caught in insulation. Let's get a thermal drone. I agreed to all of it because agreeing felt like control. The drone guy from a roofing crew owed me a favor and flew over the cabin and around the foundation Wednesday night. We got crisp, top-down footage of roof, vents, skirting, snowpack, heat signatures leaking from known duct runs. Nothing under the house except cold voids and one warm plume where the bathroom drain passed near an uninsulated section. Your mystery beast is a plumbing mistake, he said, laughing. I laughed too hard at that and paid him cash. Thursday, Rick the wildlife guy finally came with 2 live traps and a skeptical expression. He checked my photos, sniffed the air near the hatch, and said the musk reminded him of wet dog and rotten venison. He set 1 trap baited with sardines near the crawl access, 1 with liver just inside after we propped the hatch. What are we hoping for? I asked. Raccoon big enough to haunt your dreams, he said. Neither trap caught anything. Bait gone from both. Trigger plates untouched. Rick stood there with his hands on his hips, staring at the sprung spring without the door dropped. Could be frozen mechanism, he muttered. It was 34 degrees. Nothing froze. By then, Airbnb messaging had shifted from routine to cautious. Got any explanation for the howling? One guest asked. Another wrote, We heard someone under the cabin around 2 a.m. Is this normal? I started preemptively warning people. Rural noise possible. If anything concerns you, call me immediately. Most still came. Money was money. But I began sleeping there on turnover nights again. Not because I felt brave, but because if something happened with guests inside, I needed to be 10 minutes away, not 40. The eyes kept showing up in brief, surgical moments, never long enough for certainty to settle. Through the mudroom seam at 217. Once through a knot hole in the hall where I'd removed trim to inspect subfloor deflection. Once from the darkness behind the crawl hatch when I opened it at dawn. 2 reflective ovals hanging higher than they should have been, then gone before my brain caught up. Every time same details. Level, patient. Sideways blink if I held the light too long. Fear changed shape on me. At first it was spikes. Then it became a constant background voltage, like standing near energized bus bars and pretending your gloves are enough. I stopped playing music while I worked because I needed to hear floor sounds. I stopped drinking even 1 beer at night because I needed clean reaction time. I started writing down every event in a paper notebook. Time, weather, moon phase, load on panel, who was present, what was heard, what moved. If this was stress or grief, pattern would expose it. If it was physical, pattern would expose it too. Pattern stayed stubborn. 2:17 a.m. 3 pulses, call. Movement primarily mudroom to hallway span. A week after Luke saw the eyes, I got the second thing I can't explain away. It was just me at the cabin that night. No guests till Friday. I was there to swap a failing GFCI and reset one trail cam that had gone blank. Clouds had broken by midnight, leaving hard moonlight over the clearing. I didn't plan to stay, but freezing rain started and the road out turned to glass. So I rolled my cot out in the living room and kept my boots on. I woke before my alarm to silence so complete it felt padded. 2:16 on my phone. I stood in the dark hallway, one hand on the wall, and waited. Thumb, thumb, thumb. The boards under my socks trembled in sequence, not random, as if weight traveled beneath the joists from kitchen side toward the bedrooms. Then the howl pushed up through the floor, lower than before, dragging at the end like something trying to form a second sound and failing. I hit my headlamp and watched the runner. The center of it lifted, not high, maybe half an inch, but it lifted in a moving swell that traveled 3 feet and settled, then rose again farther down, like shoulders rolling under a blanket. I backed into the living room, and that's when moonlight from the lakeside windows caught the wall opposite me. A shadow moved across the paneling, tall, hunched, wrongly segmented. The source should have been outside to cast that shape, but the shadow tracked with the movement I was feeling under my feet. It rose in sections, paused, then advanced with deliberate weight toward the hallway mouth. For 1 second it looked like a man bent double. Then it lengthened, 4-part, too long. Head thrust forward on a neck that didn't read canine or human. I spun, expecting something at the windows. Tree branch, person, anything real enough to anchor what I was seeing. Outside was empty snow and black pines. No figure, no branch movement. Nothing that should cast that silhouette. Behind me, floorboards gave a sharp, complaining crack, as if a joist took sudden load. The hallway runner rippled once more and flattened. I heard breathing then, not mine. A wet, close inhale from directly below the threshold to the bedrooms. I did not investigate. I want that clear. I did not crouch. I did not shine light into seams. I did not prove anything. I retreated to the mudroom, grabbed keys, and sat in my truck with the doors locked until first light burned the trees gray. From the driver's seat, I watched the cabin windows go from black to pale blue. No movement, no sound. At sunrise, I went back inside because pretending none of it happened was harder than checking. The hallway runner was shifted left again, more this time, about 10 inches, curled at one corner where it had bunched. A framed map on the wall had tilted as if from vibration. In the dust near the wood stove, a single dark smear marked the edge of one floor seam, like mud dragged up and then wiped away. I photographed everything, measured everything, wrote it all down with shaking hands that made my numbers look like someone else's. By noon, with sunlight through every curtain and a podcast playing too loud for my phone, the place almost looked normal again. Just an old hunting cabin with uneven floors and a tired owner leaning into superstition. I repeated that to myself all afternoon while I re-leveled the runner and wiped the smear and reset the map straight. Old cabin, light tricks, stress. By evening, I could almost say it without hearing the lie in it. So I stayed. Not because I felt brave. Because once you've seen a problem and keep renting the building anyway, you owe that building a real inspection. I told myself I'd do one invasive check, document it, and either close the listing or prove I was losing my grip. I ate a protein bar at the kitchen counter around 9, pulled on knee pads and laid out tools like it was any other repair. impact driver, trim pry, oscillating saw, spare screws, dust mask, headlamp, maglite backup. I set 2 LED work lights in the living room and aimed them low so shadows wouldn't play tricks. The dark smear had been near the old wood stove, right where the floor dipped a little over the hallway span. Dale had patched that area sometime in the 90s with mismatched tongue-and-groove planks, and one board had always sat proud by a 16th. I'd noticed it 100 times. Never opened it. At 9:47 p.m., I scored the seam with a utility blade, backed out 3 trim screws from the stove side edge, and eased the pry bar under. The board lifted half an inch, then hung on old nails. I leaned my weight into it and felt, through steel, a soft pressure from below. Not impact, not a strike. More like something touching the underside and holding. I froze, counted to 5, and told myself it was cross-bracing flex. Then I heard breathing under the board, close enough to move dust. I should have dropped it and walked. Instead, I reached for the maglite with my left hand, clicked it on, and opened the gap just enough to put a beam through. At first, the light caught only joist edge and churned dirt. Then it stuttered over wet black fur clumped with mud. The hair length wrong for anything local, longer in patches, shaved to scar tissue in others. A shape moved into the beam. Not quick, not panicked. Deliberate. A snout pushed up between joists, longer than a dog's, narrower at the bridge, with a pale scar running from between the eyes, down to one side of the nose like an old split that healed crooked. Nostrils worked twice, fast. I smelled rot and copper like opened gut pile and hot pennies. I jerked the light back and it moved with it. That's when I saw the hand. Not a paw. A hand with too many obvious joints. Bent wrong at the wrist. Black skin showing through sparse fur. 4 blunt-nailed digits hooked over the joist edge and flexed one by one, testing purchase. The nails weren't claws in the cat sense. Thicker, flattened like worn hoof knives. My body did that old mammal thing, where blood dumps out of your hands and your hearing narrows to a tunnel. I remember my own pulse in my jaw more than I remember sound. Then it exhaled. Hot breath hit the flashlight lens and fogged it white. In that white haze, I heard teeth click in uneven pairs. Click, 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 click. Like someone trying to match a rhythm and getting it almost right. I had an insane thought that it was copying the way I tap conduit straps in 3s when I'm lining them up. I slammed the board down so hard the screwdriver bit snapped in my impact. Something under there scraped backward, heavy and fast now, and I fell on my ass, kicking away from the stove with no plan except distance. From beneath the floor came a dragging sound, dense and granular, as if it were pulling something hard through dirt. Antler, branch, bone. It caught on a pier, jerked free, dragged again toward the mudroom side. I don't remember standing up. I remember being outside bent over with my palms on my knees in 20-degree air, dry heaving into snow that sparkled under the motion light. When I could breathe, I went back in only long enough to grab my keys and notebook. I left every tool on the floor and drove to the end of the logging road before I pulled over. I sat with the engine running and interior lights off, staring at the steering wheel while my whole body shook in little aftershocks. I said out loud, to nobody, I saw it. Hearing the sentence made it worse and better at the same time. I was back at daylight because fear doesn't pay invoices. Inside, nothing looked destroyed. Board near the stove was down but skewed. 2 nails had pushed up from below hard enough to mushroom the finish around them. My broken driver bit was still on the floor. The air still held that musk, faint and sour. I took photos, measurements. Sample of fur snagged on a splinter near the seam. 3 coarse strands, black with gray at the root. I sealed them in a zip bag, like I was suddenly qualified for evidence handling. Then I noticed my knit cap was gone. It had been on the mudroom bench the night before, same place I always tossed it. I checked truck, under seats, laundry bag. Everywhere, gone. Same with 1 leather work glove from my tool tote. Missing 1 of a pair is normal in my life. Missing both, plus cap, after that night didn't feel normal. I opened the crawl hatch in full sun with a respirator and a bright bar light and crawled in farther than I ever had before. Belly to dirt, shoulder scraping joists, elbows in mud. 10 feet in, under the hallway run, I found them. Cap first, packed against a block pier. Glove beside it, fingers chewed open but not eaten through, just torn and left. Next to both sat 2 deer bones, clean and yellowed, and what looked like a length of stripped birch branch. A little pile. A cache. My stuff. Not random trash. Scented things that were mine. I backed out so hard I banged my head on the hatch frame and split the skin above my ear. Didn't feel it until blood dripped on my collar. That afternoon, I dumped every audio file from the contact mics to my laptop and isolated the 217 events with headphones, mostly low-frequency rumble and structure noise. Then, on 3 nights, a pattern. 3 taps from below, pause, then 2 lighter taps, then a wet double click that matched what I heard by the stove. I played 1 clip, unconsciously tapped the desk 3 times with my pen. From the file, 2 seconds later, something tapped back. I replayed it 10 times before I admitted what the timing meant. It wasn't reacting to me in real time, I was days late, but the pattern was call and response. On site, in that moment, I'd knocked somewhere in my routine without remembering, and something below had answered. By evening, I had a folder of photos, audio clips, and notes that made me look either very prepared or very insane. I drove to the sheriff's substation in town and asked to file a supplemental report. Different deputy this time, younger, polite. He scrolled my photos, listened to 15 seconds of audio through 1 earbud, and said, "I can note ongoing suspected animal intrusion." "It took my clothing," I said. He gave me the careful nod people use in ER waiting rooms. Animals drag items all the time. It arranged them. Could be den behavior. What den behavior copies Knox? He set the earbud down. "Mr. West, if you feel unsafe, don't stay there. That's the practical answer." Practical answer. Like I hadn't built my life on practical answers. I called DNR again from the parking lot, got voicemail again. Texted Rick. He replied, "Busy through weekend. Can refer someone next week." Next week. At home that night, Erin came over and found me cleaning mud off tools at my kitchen sink at midnight. "You're white as a sheet," she said. "What happened?" I told her more than I'd told anyone, which in hindsight was probably unfair to both of us. I left out nothing, the snout, the hand, the breath, the cache, She listened with her arms folded tight across her chest, not mocking, not believing either. "Travis," she said finally, "you need sleep and maybe a doctor. I need backup at that cabin. You need to stop going to that cabin. I can't just abandon bookings with people inside. Then cancel them? With what money, Erin?" She looked at me a long time, eyes wet and angry. "Do you hear yourself? You're choosing a rental calendar over your life. No, I'm choosing not to get sued into the ground and lose my house. She grabbed her coat and stood in my doorway for a second like she might say something softer. Instead, she said, "If you keep doing this, I can't be part of it." Door shut. Lock clicked. Quiet. At 2:17 a.m., my upstairs pipes knocked 3 times as the heat kicked on, and I sat bolt upright in bed with my heart trying to punch out of my chest. The next 2 days, I treated the cabin like a hostile work site. No solo crawlspace entry, no kneeling over open seams. No interior stay past midnight unless guests were present. Main exits checked and cleared every visit. Keys clipped to belt, not set down. I installed brighter exterior floods on separate circuits, replaced the mudroom hollow core with a solid slab I had in storage, and added a slide bolt high enough that guests couldn't accidentally lock themselves out. I mounted one camera inside facing the hallway runner, against platform rules and my own ethics, because ethics get blurry when the floor is breathing. It didn't matter. The camera glitched at 2:16 every night and came back at 2:19 with time code skips and one frame blown white. Thursday afternoon, I arrived for turnover and found all 3 deadbolts still locked, windows secured, no sign of forced entry. Inside, my paper notebook lay open on the kitchen table where I'd not left it. I keep that notebook in a zip pouch in my pack-out. Always zipped, always in the same compartment. Now it was open to a page where I'd written in block letters, "Mudroom to hallway travel path." Across that page, 3 muddy streaks had been dragged top to bottom, parallel, evenly spaced. No footprints, no handprint, just marks. My first thought was guest prank, but the last guests had checked out 2 days prior and cleaners hadn't been in. No one had my owner code except Luke, and Luke was in Green Bay for work. I verified by calling and hearing road noise, and his annoyed, "What now?" "Did you come out here and touch my notebook?" "Dude, no." "Did anyone borrow your copy of my key?" Silence. "Why are you asking like that?" "Because something is in my house, and it knows where I write things down." Another silence, longer. Then, "I'm coming Saturday. I don't care what I have to cancel." By Friday morning, weather alerts were all over local radio. Wet snow, high wind, possible tree fall on secondary roads. My weekend booking was still active. A couple from Milwaukee arriving that evening for 2 nights. I messaged them a road warning and offered free cancellation. They replied, "We're already on our way." Excited, of course they were. I called Airbnb support and asked if I could force cancel for safety concerns without penalty. After 22 minutes and 2 transfers, I got, "Unless there is an active government closure or verified property damage, host-initiated cancellation fees may apply." "Verified by who?" I asked. "Documented inspection, law enforcement, or platform-approved contractor report." I almost laughed. I had a deputy telling me it was raccoons, and a wildlife guy booked out. Great. By dusk, freezing rain had turned the drive into polished stone under new snow. The Milwaukee couple arrived just before full dark, cheerful, loaded with board games and artisanal snacks. Mid-30s, polite, completely unprepared for where they were. I did check in fast and flat. Stove demo, flashlights in drawer, emergency numbers on fridge. The husband pointed at my tool bag by the door. "You staying nearby?" "About 20 minutes out," I lied. Then corrected myself because lying felt dangerous now. Actually, with this weather, I may stay in my truck down the drive for a bit in case power trips. He grinned like it was Frontier Theater. Love that level of service. I stepped outside and called Luke. Straight to voicemail. Called again. Nothing. Called Ken. Mary answered and said they were in Wausau overnight for her sister's surgery. No one home. Called Rick. Phone off. By 9, wind was snapping through the pines hard enough to shake snow free in sheets. My truck sat by the shed, nose toward the road, chains in back, tank full. Prepared to leave if I had to. At 10:13, the first branch came down across the drive behind me with a crack like a rifle shot. Not huge, but enough to block a normal car. I could still maybe push through with the truck if I committed. At 10:51, another tree dropped farther out near the culvert. This one I heard in pieces, groan, tear, impact, then silence. I walked it with a flashlight and found the road fully blocked both directions. One trunk forward, one back. No fast way out without a saw crew. Cell service flickered to one bar, then none. I stood in wet snow with my phone raised like an idiot, watching it search and fail, and felt something shift in me from fear to math. 2 guests asleep inside. Storm blocking the drive. No signal. Nearest neighbor quarter-mile away, and gone. Time approaching 2:17. I went back in, set my keys on the counter out of habit, then snatched them up and clipped them to my belt. From somewhere under the mudroom, 3 slow taps answered. From somewhere under the mudroom, 3 slow taps answered. Not random bumps, not settling. Measured. Waiting. I looked at the microwave clock. 1:38. Too early for the usual 3 pulses, which meant either the pattern had changed, or it was awake and aware enough to start when it wanted. I walked to the living room and found the Milwaukee couple, Ben and Alina, I remembered now, on the couch with a blanket over their legs and a board game spread between them. They looked up smiling until they saw my face. "What's up?" Ben said. I kept my voice low and even. "I need you both to listen carefully and do exactly what I say. No argument." Alina sat up straight. "Is there a fire?" "Not yet." I swallowed. "I've got a severe structural issue under the floor. It may come up tonight. We may lose power on purpose. You need shoes on, coats on, phones in pockets now." Ben gave a short laugh that died quick. "Wait, what do you mean come up?" "I mean the floor may fail." I couldn't say creature to 2 strangers at 1:38 a.m. in a storm-blocked cabin. I've seen movement under this section all month. Roads blocked by trees. We're doing a controlled exit through the bedroom window, if I tell you. They stared at me. Wind hit the cabin hard enough to rattle the kitchen window. Alina stood first. Okay. Ben shoes." That snapped him out of disbelief. He started moving. While they dressed, I moved like I was on a job site during a transformer fault. Fast hands, no wasted motion. At the panel, I clicked off every branch breaker except mudroom and 1 bedroom receptacle run, then shut the bedroom run too. Main stayed on for the moment. I dug through my tote for what I had. A portable combo AFCI/GFCI adapter box I'd built for troubleshooting nuisance trips, 2 lengths of stripped copper braid, a scrap of copper mesh from a shielding job, electrical tape, and a heavy rubber doorway mat from under the bench. I laid the copper mesh flat on the mudroom floor, where anything entering from living room would plant weight first if drawn to light. I split it into 2 offset sections with a finger-width gap, taped them down hard so they wouldn't shift, and tied each side to separate leads through the AFCI box. It was ugly, temporary, and could backfire in 10 ways. But if wet skin, nails, or saliva bridged that gap at speed, it would arc before tripping. I set 2 LED work lights on milk crates at knee height in the mudroom doorway, aimed directly into the living room like stage spots. Plug them into the same run. If I killed the house and then brought that circuit up alone, the brightest thing in the cabin would be that mudroom choke point. I tested once, half-second burst. White blast. Good. Back in the hallway, I opened the small bedroom window over the side yard and shoved until it stuck halfway. Jammed. Ben hissed behind me. I know. I planted my hands and heaved. The swollen frame gave with a crack and shot up 2 more inches. Splinters drove into both palms. I barely felt them. Alina was shaking so hard she couldn't get her phone flashlight to stop strobing. Travis, what is under the floor? I met her eyes and decided truth was kinder than guessing. I don't have a name for it. She went very still. Ben muttered, Jesus. I positioned them by the bed. When I say go, Ben first, then turn and catch Alina. Drop to your side, don't jump straight-legged. Truck is by the shed with headlights on. Do not stop. Do not look back. If I don't make it out with you, you still go. Ben shook his head hard. No, man, we're not leaving you. You are. My voice came out sharper than I intended. I know this layout. You don't. The house gave a low groan. Microwave clock clicked to 2:16. All 3 of us heard the first pulse from below at the same instant. Thump. Dust jumped from the bedroom doorframe. Thump. The mattress trembled against my thigh. Thump. Somewhere in the main room, a board nail squealed upward through wood. Then the howl came, and it wasn't an animal call anymore. It started as that chest-deep subterranean moan I'd heard for weeks, then broke into a rough, ragged mimic of human shouting. 2 syllables, almost words, like somebody underwater yelling through mud. Hey! It dropped back into a bass moan that shook the closet door. Alina clamped both hands over her mouth. Ben whispered, No, hun. No. From the living room came a sharp crack, then another, then a tearing series of pops as tongue-and-groove floorboards split along old seams near the hearth. I stepped into the hall and saw the main room floor hump upward in a moving ridge. Rug buckled. Coffee table tipped. The seam by the fireplace stones burst open and something black and wet shoved through, forcing lumber apart with slow hydraulic strength. For one frozen second, I saw only pieces. An elongated forearm hooking over plank edges, fur matted dark with dirt and old blood, pale scar tissue webbing across shoulder like burned hide, a head too narrow and too long for the chest beneath it. Then it climbed fully into the room. Tall isn't the word. It unfolded. First on all 4s, spine humped against the ceiling line, then rising in sections until the crown of its head brushed just below the light fixture. Taller than me by at least a foot upright, but with proportions built wrong for bipedal balance, forearms hanging nearly to its knees, wrists kinked inward, hind legs heavy and over-jointed like they wanted to spring sideways instead of forward. Its coat was black where it existed, but broken everywhere by bald, pale scar plates that caught light like old wax. Ribs moved under skin in narrow bands. The snout I'd seen through the floor was only part of the face. Above it, the eye sockets were deep and wet shiny, and the eyes themselves had milky halos around mirror-bright centers that tracked like polished steel. It opened its mouth and the jaw unhinged farther than any canine should. Hinge line extending back toward the neck. Strings of saliva hanging and trembling. Teeth were uneven lengths. Some blunted flat, some needle thin. When it breathed, carrion heat rolled across the room. It turned its head toward me with patient curiosity, same as those first eyes under the seam. Then, in a broken approximation of my own voice pattern, it clicked out 3 taps with its teeth. Click, click, click. It took 1 step forward and floorboards punched under its weight. Training beat panic by half a second. Half a second was enough. I lunged into the utility closet and slapped the mudroom breaker down. The cabin went black. Total. Wind and breath only. Behind me, the creature gave a violent, confused bellow and slammed into furniture. Wood shattered. Nails screamed. I counted 1, 2. Then snapped the mudroom circuit on. The 2 work lights detonated white in the dark, strobing through airborne dust. The effect was surgical. 1 bright doorway, everything else shadow. The creature pivoted instantly toward the light, pupils pinning to needle points. It dropped to a charging crouch and came in low and fast, forelimbs pounding. "Now!" I yelled down the hall. "Go!" I heard Ben hit the window frame. The creature crossed the living room in 3 bounds and hit the mudroom threshold. 1 forehand landed square across the copper sections. The arc blast was a blue-white sheet that filled the doorway with a crack, like a shotgun in a steel room. My left ear went dead with a high electric whine. Ozone and burnt hair punched the air. The AFCI tripped instantly. Lights flicked, and the thing convulsed sideways into the bench hard enough to rip it off wall anchors. It wasn't dead. It screamed. High this time, almost childlike for 1 impossible second, then dropped back into that subfloor moan while thrashing against the door, claws shredding pine. I ran. At the bedroom, Ben was halfway out, boots scraping siding. "Drop!" I shoved his legs. He went out and vanished with a grunt into snow. I grabbed Alina under the arms and heaved her up. She got 1 knee on the sill, then stuck on her coat. "Leave it!" I tore the coat free at the shoulder seam and pushed. She fell out yelling Ben's name. Something hit the hallway floor behind me with enough force to bounce the mattress. The bedroom light fixture burst and showered glass. I spun and saw it at the end of the hall, backlit by intermittent strobe spill from the mudroom. It had regained its feet, 1 forearm smoking where the arc burned through fur to raw pink tissue. The jaw hung open too wide, tongue black and roped. It tried to shape another human sound and produced a warped "Dijkstra" before collapsing into a howl. Hearing my own name fragment from that throat broke whatever courage I had left. I dove through the window head first, caught the sill with both palms, and felt splinters drive deeper. My left shoulder tore hot as I twisted free and hit snow on my side. "Truck!" I shouted, rolling up. "Move!" Ben had Alina by the elbow, both of them staggering toward the shed through crusted drifts. I grabbed my keys from my belt, fumbled twice with numb fingers, and remote start failed on first press. Second press, headlights flashed. Behind us, the cabin roared. Wood breaking, something heavy dropping back through the split floor. The howling shifted under us again, subterranean, circling. It had gone back down. "Get in, get in." I shoved Alina into back seat, Ben into front because he was closer. I jumped behind wheel, slammed it into 4 low, and gunned through the side yard instead of the blocked drive, aiming for the old snowmobile cut line that crossed my north boundary. Branches whipped both mirrors off within 50 yards. Snowpack hid stumps. The truck bottomed once so hard my teeth clacked. Ben was white-knuckled on the dash, repeating, "Holy shit, holy shit, holy shit," like prayer. As we crested the little rise behind the cabin, the howling came one last time through the floorboards of the house behind us, muffled now, furious thrashing under timber and stone. Then distance swallowed it. The cut line dumped us onto a plowed county road 20 minutes later. None of us spoke. My left ear was still mostly gone, just a shrill tone and muffled voices. My shoulder throbbed every time I turned the wheel. Blood from the split above my ear had dried stiff down my collar. My palms burned like I'd grabbed a hot manifold. At the first bars of cell service, Ben dialed 911 and couldn't get words out in order. I took the phone with shaking hands, dropped it once, finally connected, gave location and structural collapse with possible animal attack. 3 survivors need medical. The dispatcher kept asking what kind of animal. I said unknown large mammal. She asked if anyone was still at the scene. I said no and meant it in every way. We drove 30 miles south before stopping, because none of us wanted to be within hearing distance of that forest. A 24-hour gas station off Highway 51 glowed like a ship in fog. I parked crooked across 2 spaces and sat gripping the wheel until a clerk banged gently on my window. "You folks okay?" he asked, face pale as he looked at ours. Ben answered before I could. "Call 911 again. They're coming, but call again." Inside, the clerk wrapped Alina in a blanket from a display shelf and sat her by the coffee station. She kept saying, "It stood up. It stood up." To nobody. A volunteer EMT crew reached us first, then county deputies. Somebody put a foil blanket around my shoulders. Somebody else cleaned the cut by my ear and picked wood splinters from both palms with tweezers, while I stared at a rack of beef jerky like it was written in code. "Any loss of consciousness?" EMT asked. "No." "Ringing in ears?" "Left side? Shoulder pain?" "Yes." He palpated and I swore. "Likely strain or partial tear," he said. "You should get imaging." Deputy with notebook asked me to repeat from the beginning. I started with storm, blocked road, floor failure. I got as far as large animal came through and heard how insane I sounded in fluorescent light at 4:47 a.m. Boots, dripping slush on tile. By sunrise, I was sitting on a plastic chair wrapped in foil, giving statement number 2 to a state trooper while Ben and Alina gave theirs separately. Every time the automatic doors opened, cold air hit and I jumped. And they took us back out after daylight with 2 deputies, 1 DNR warden finally reached by radio, and a tow guy with a chainsaw to clear access. The cabin looked like a bomb had gone off in one room and nowhere else. Living room floor split in a 6-foot ragged seam by the hearth. Couch overturned. Mudroom bench torn free. Deep gouges raked across pressure-treated beams, visible through the break. 4 parallel trenches too wide-spaced for known local predators. Musk so strong it stung eyes. No body. No tracks. They could agree on once wind-scoured snow, and responders trampled everything. The warden crouched by the opening with a light and said, "Could be bear forced up from under when threatened." "Bear doesn't fit that crawl space upright," I said. He gave me a neutral look. Adrenaline changes perception. I almost laughed. They photographed, measured. Bagged hair clumps from splintered boards. One deputy asked where my improvised wiring was. I showed him the melted AFCI box and copper mesh in the mudroom, now blackened at one edge. His eyebrows climbed. "You rigged an electrified trap?" "I rigged a deterrent on a dedicated circuit to buy evacuation time." He wrote for a long time after that. Because guests were involved, I filed an initial full incident report. I told it straight the first pass. Recurring underfloor vocalization, visual sightings, emergent unknown animal, defensive electrical deterrent, evacuation through window. I handed over photos from my phone and selected audio clips. 2 days later, an insurance investigator called and asked if I had documented pre-existing structural instability prior to guest occupancy. Yes. Did you continue renting despite awareness of hazard? I looked at my kitchen wall and said nothing. He tried another angle. Mr. West, creative storytelling after a loss event can complicate coverage, especially if negligence is in play. Creative storytelling. By the time their site assessor used the phrase fabricated hazard narratives in an email, something in me shut. I hired a local attorney for one consultation and followed his advice exactly. Stick to verifiable facts. Stop speculating. Stop volunteering extraordinary claims to entities whose job is payout minimization. So the final coding became what paperwork could tolerate. Structural floor failure with wildlife intrusion during severe weather event. Not false, not true enough. I kept copies of everything else. Unedited audio, photos of eye shine and flower displacement, notebook scans, and one frame from a glitched interior camera that showed a blurred vertical shape where no shape should be. I moved it all to an offline drive, encrypted, then put that drive in a fire safe in my closet. I have never uploaded any of it. Delisting the cabin took less than 5 minutes on the app. Selling it took 6 months, and a loss I'm still paying off. A timber group out of Phillips eventually bought the parcel with full disclosure that the structure had severe damage and would be demolished. I drove out the day they signed to remove my tools. A yellow excavator sat idling in the clearing, exhaust hanging blue in cold air. The foreman, a guy named Sutter with a beard full of sawdust, shook my hand and said, "We'll have it down by noon." "Get the floor and piers together," I said. "Don't leave crawl space voids open." He looked at me oddly. "Yeah, we're not amateurs." I stood by my truck while the first bite of bucket tore through the living room wall. When the machine hit the hearth, the floor collapsed inward and exposed the understructure completely. Churned dirt, snapped insulation, scratches in looping patterns around piers, like something had paced tight circles for years. Could have been anything, I told myself. Could have, I didn't wait for noon. Work changed next because it had to. I turned down every remote service call west of Minocqua, then all residential crawl space jobs, then eventually most residential work altogether. Too many old houses, too many unknown voids under your feet at 8 p.m. in winter. I took a position with a commercial electrical contractor in Wausau doing interiors, tenant build-outs, clinics, offices, schools, bright ceilings, open studs, no crawl hatches hidden behind brooms. Start at 7, done by 4:30, unless someone else can cover late shift. First week, my foreman asked why I kept requesting a second tech for underfloor cable pulls. "Company policy in my head," I said. He shrugged. "Fine by me, safer anyway." I haven't worked a solo night call since. Luke came over one Sunday in April with a 6-pack I didn't drink and a torque wrench he'd borrowed months earlier. We sat on my porch steps in silence until he said, "I'm sorry." "For what part?" "For thinking you were spiraling, for jokes, for all of it." I looked at the street, not him. "You saw the eyes." "I did." He rubbed his palms on his jeans. "I still tried to make it normal after? That's on me?" I nodded once. That was what forgiveness looked like between us, acknowledgement, then practical follow-through. He started checking in before storms, helped me move storage totes without being asked. We don't talk about that night unless necessary. We talk about truck brakes, Mom's blood pressure, whether the Packers drafted like idiots. It's not easy trust. It's working trust. Erin and I didn't recover. We met once at a coffee place in Rhinelander in May. She stirred her drink for a long time and said, "I need a partner who can be present, Travis. You're somewhere else all the time." "I'm trying, I know." Tears stood in her eyes but didn't fall. "Trying isn't the same as being here." She reached for my hand, felt the scar ridge in my palm from splinters, and pulled back like it burned her. We ended it kindly and final. No screaming. Somehow worse. 2 former clients became unexpected lifelines. Gus Halverson, who runs a marina, calls every November just to ask, "You sleeping?" Marcy Klein, whose lodge I rewired years back, texts me the first hard freeze. "Pipes knocking yet?" Breathe. Ground yourself. They know enough to not ask for stories. They just keep a line open. I appreciate that more than advice. I live in Stevens Point now, 2nd floor apartment in a brick building with too many exterior lights for my neighbor's taste. Motion floods on both balconies, reinforced door sensors that chirp on open, close, contact alarms on every window, white noise machines in bedroom and living room set to steady rain, every night, all year. No first-floor units, no exposed crawl space access, non-negotiable. My day starts at 5 a.m. gym, same treadmill, same 20-minute lift circuit, because routine tells my nervous system what decade it's in. Work by 7. Lunch at noon, whether I'm hungry or not. Therapy twice a month with a clinician in Plover who does trauma work and doesn't flinch when I describe sounds instead of memories. No alcohol. I learned fast that whiskey turns vigilance into panic at 2 a.m. In winter, pipes in this old building knock when heat cycles. 3 knocks can still freeze me in place. When it happens, I don't argue with my brain anymore. I do what therapy drilled into me. Name 5 things I can see, 4 I can touch, 3 I can hear that are not howling, 2 I can smell. One truth, I survived that night. Then I log the time in a notes app. Data calms me. Same way it always did, just different fault now. People sometimes figure out I used to run a remote Airbnb and ask for the crazy story. If they joke about cryptids, skinwalkers, wendigos, whatever internet category of the week, I smile politely and say, it was a structural incident. We got out. Then I change the subject to panel ratings or snow tires. I'm not protecting a legend. I'm protecting my sleep. Last fall, I drove north for a supply pickup and took the long way back on purpose. Not to revisit, just to prove I could pass within 20 miles and keep breathing. The logging road turnoff to Dale's old parcel is gated now with fresh timber signs. From the county road, you can't see the clearing anymore, just young growth and slash piles. I pulled over anyway, sat with engine running, listened. Wind in pines. A raven somewhere far off. No howl. I put the truck in drive and left. Whatever lived under that cabin has no name for me. Naming invites ownership. And I don't want either. I know what I heard, what I saw, and what it could do to wood, wiring, and people if given a floor to hide beneath. That's enough truth for one life. Most weeks now still fit in a tool bag, just different tools. Voltage tester, torque driver, ear protection, grounding exercises, boundaries. I keep things bright. I keep exits clear. I work in daylight. And when winter nights get very still, I turn up the white noise, check the locks once, and remind myself out loud if I have to, that the sound under my feet is just pipes, just building, just now.